Hello, folks. My name is Ryan Murphy. I am an honors geometry teacher at Del Val School. I want to thank you for watching this video at our virtual back to school night. I appreciate your time and I value it. So I want to make sure that this video is as concise and as informative as possible. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run you through how I run the course for a bit, some of my course philosophy, as well as some of what the course entails, and also a little bit about me as a person. So me as a person, I am indeed Mr. Murphy. Every teacher's email here at the school is first name, last name at dvrhs.org. That's how we can primarily be contacted, and I am no exception from that. I'm a proud graduate school graduate from Rutgers. I got out of their graduate school of education in 2013. Another point of pride for me is I very recently got my supervisor certificate from Rowan's program. At the school, I am, as you can imagine, I'm a math teacher, but I also do computer science. So some of the students that I have for honors geometry, I may also have them for AP computer science principles. If not this year, then perhaps in the future if they're interested. I'm also a co-advisor for Sport and Spirit Club, which is a club in which students attend sporting events and participate to help things run smoothly. So for example, they could be ball fetchers or scorekeepers, maybe announcers, maybe they sell merchandise or fundraise. It's a very good club to be a part of, to be actively involved in the community and the sports scene. And there's some perks too for seniors. I also do SAT prep instruction. That's something to maybe perhaps keep in mind when your students come of age where that becomes something that they're interested in. It's something that currently Del Val offers over the summer for free. And I run the math portion of it. Additionally, as a person, when I'm not being Mr. Murphy for the school, I am being a loving dog father to my dogs. Benji and Oliver, that's them in the picture. I also play the drums, that's them in the picture. And lately my hobbies have consisted of trying to stay fit, as I'm sure most people have endeavored to do over the pandemic. And I also play games on the side every once in a while. So about my course, or about the way that I approach it. Honors geometry in general is very different from algebra, especially middle school algebra. And indeed, honors math courses in Del Val are different from what students have come to expect, I'm sure. It's a lot less computational. That element is still there for sure, but there's a lot more logic and reasoning and critical thinking and analysis to it. And sometimes this catches students off guard because they expect to just be graphing graphs and solving for X most of the time, when in fact, this is not a geometry specific thing, but it's definitely true of geometry that this will not be the case primarily any longer. They're going to have to dig deep outside of their comfort zone and really try new things and be a little bit open-minded to the possibilities of what math can actually be in terms of, again, not just computations, but data analysis, graphical analysis, and again, logic and deduction. We have a whole chapter dedicated to that. In terms of how I approach these topics with the class, I try to be as exploratory as possible. I try not to have it be me telling them things and them writing it down, even though when it comes to things like definitions, sometimes it has to be that sort of way. But there's a lot of hands-on activities that students can actually do. I'll demonstrate some shortly. I recognize that it's important to have a balance between, again, the computational basic principles. Can you solve for X or can you simplify certain expressions? It is important, especially for honor students, to stay challenged, to be able to think abstractly and work conceptually. That's really what developing critical thinking is all about. But then at the same time, it is important that they be able to apply these things in a concrete and practical way. So I'm constantly juggling and balancing these three core principles. This is just my own personal philosophy, and I work to incorporate these for any given topic insofar as that's possible. This is a course with New Jersey state standards attached to it. So naturally, I would abide by those, make sure that they are all satisfied by the end of the year. But also, I am conscious of student needs. I've had students come to me before for geometry projects. That might be in other classes like woodshop. I've had students who were doing work for their Eagle Scout project, for example, come to me and try to work out the trigonometry of the angles and how things would work like that. So I try to incorporate as many of those real life situations as possible, and just be aware that I'm going to work under the assumption that a lot of these students are going to proceed with math into algebra 2 and so on. So I try to make sure that they maintain those algebra skills as well. I try to do what's in the student's best interest. So here is an example of what students might see for a trig lesson. This is a very basic, and this is after we've already discussed and defined some of the trig functions and talked about how they could be applied. Here's a set of problems in which they just have to do it. They have to do the math and they have to calculate the values. And the work would follow naturally. I've prepared you here. This is the kind of thing I would show. This is a page that comes straight out of my notes, by the way. So my notes are presented in a way that's very much fill in the blank. to cut down on the tedium of having to write stuff, because as long as students aren't writing, they have a better chance of being engaged in the lesson and actually participating. So I try to cut down on the writing and the work insofar as that's possible. To continue with the trig example, like I said, I try to like my lessons to be as dynamic as possible and to be as hands-on as possible. So in Canvas, which again, I'll give a tour of that later, but in Canvas, I provide links to some resources that students can work with, whether it's simulations or programs with dynamic variables that they can move things around to try and see results, or how certain variables affect certain outcomes, as well as some critical thinking questions like, yes, our calculator can calculate the sine of 30, but the answer to that should be very familiar. And it's because that particular value is something that's tied into a previous topic, special right triangles. So kind of connecting the old and the new in neat ways and discovering that some of the old principles still apply, but in a new setting, or that the new topic is consistent with old stuff. I think that's important for a cohesive class. And just to demonstrate what this unit circle trig is, here's a little program I mocked up in something called Geometer's Sketchpad, where students can change these values and see that as the angle at angle O changes here, the values of the sine and cosine and tangent would change as well. I guess the good part of having this on video is that you could pause it and try things as you deem necessary or just breeze by it. I also do recognize that even in an honors class such as this, there is a variety of skill and a variety of challenges that students would be willing and capable of accepting. So every once in a while on the side, as supplementary material, I'd provide problems like this. This is something that was given to me by a colleague that I found particularly interesting. A sort of real world application that might have them applying some new concepts like trig. Here are some of the answers to these. What I would say in my flipped classroom videos is pause it and try it, students, but I would obviously not hold you parents accountable for this as well. But here's a solution to method 1 and a method to solution, or solution to method 2 as well. So again, I like to challenge my students to varying degrees, to whatever degree they see fit for their skill level. And just one more example, typically infinitely spinning in the background, is some 3D modeling software called GeoGebra that we actually already worked with this year. So again, another testament to me trying to do hands-on things whenever it's possible to do so. And that should more or less wrap up the class, aside from, oh, I almost forgot, I'm sorry, the Canvas tour, the Slight Canvas tour. This is what this is in student mode. So this is what every student sees when they log on to my Canvas course. There's class info, there's about the teacher, and then there's this week, which includes the modules with the notes, which are typically easily accessible. They include I guess I'll show, a module dedicated to a weekly schedule, which I have per week, but otherwise content is cited by or sorted by topics rather than by date. And I know every teacher does it a little bit differently, or they may do it a little bit differently. If I go back to the homepage, I just want to touch upon one thing under the class info section. It's a lot of repeats of what I've already said, but to focus primarily on the grading policy, things that are graded. I don't grade homework typically, or very infrequently, I should say. In place of nightly homework, what I usually have is something called EAs, entrance assessments, which is to say that after we finish a section on one day, when I see students at least 2 days later, depending on whether or not there's a weekend that follows, I will give them some sort of mini quiz, like a several question minor graded assignment that I'd be presenting them with at the beginning of next class. I don't end class with these sorts of things. I like to begin the next class with it. That way students have the full at least 2 days, again, to kind of brush up on the content and master it, and they have time to ask questions and possibly visit during lunch or during a free prep period to make sure that they're prepared. And these serve as kind of a wake-up call to the students to kind of, it's meant to be more informational. Yes, it tells me how well the students are understanding content, but it also helps them understand how well they're understanding and let them reflect upon their knowledge. That way, once they hit a quiz, they're not blindsided and recognize that they're not following so well. So these are little checkup assessments that do end up amounting to a decent amount, but otherwise there's the typical quizzes and tests. Sometimes I do projects for the miscellaneous grades. It's not consistent enough that I would list it with a normal grade point or a point assignment. And I do occasionally assign graded homework as well. So in Canvas, I have additional links to things too in the modules, like practice problems. And it's pretty much always the case that if a student is struggling with something, if they're not going to directly reach out to me, which they always can, then they have other resources available to them. So that ought to conclude everything. I'm sorry if I took up too much time. I just want to note that I do put grades in PowerSchool. Canvas is where you could find my lesson plans and my links to these resources if you were interested. And I did mention students reaching out and seeking help during my availability. This year, I happen to be free second period on both days and also during unit lunch. Whew, that should wrap it up. Again, I do very much appreciate your time. So I'm grateful that you watched this video, and I hope that it was informative, and that if you have any additional questions or concerns or anything that you'd like to reach out about, that you absolutely feel free to do so. Again, email, as is the case for everyone at the school, is first name, last name @dvrhs.org. And I am here to serve because I love being a part of this community to the extent that I am. So once again, thank you for your time, and I hope you have a fantastic evening.